All right, folks, we're in the second part now of our chapter 6, and we were just where we left off was with environmental issues, and we were talking about the sort of main ones, and I've listed them for you on the slide. And in addition to that, so what were those main ones that I was referring to? Pollution, how companies, organizations pollute, and when they do, what's the process like? And that's, when we talk about it from, there's something called cradle to the grave. So we would say, okay, that's an issue. Cradle to the grave legislation helps prevent pollution. Next, use of natural resources, and we talked a little bit about this. Okay, what does it mean to maintain sustainability, right? And be careful about the non-renewable resources that we use. So this is sort of developing our ethical conscience, but for the environment. We would say that all this information is very important to consider from an ethical lens when we make decisions in the workplace or when we're part of organizations that have to make decisions like that. And then lastly, land health. So in addition, as I was saying, you can look into your textbook, page 180, you're going to see sections where it'll say why protect the environment is one section. What is involved in protecting the environment? What do we sort of need to do to protect the environment and meet these goals that we have as a collective society, to try to value our, as I said in the last talk, value our air and our water and our land more than potentially everything else, because they are the sort of that's what keeps us alive. So that's what they sort of bring you to in your textbook with those descriptions. And we have to remember that just like we study business ethics, there is also a whole other completely sort of a completely different field of ethics that we actually call environmental ethics. And that's another field that is studied by academics as well. So we would say there's business ethics and environmental ethics, right? There's professional ethics, there's biomedical ethics, all these different fields of ethics. Here, the chapter is directed at, okay, from organizational points of view, organizations and companies, what are they responsible for? And when it comes to the environment, okay? If you move to the next slide, corporate responsibility and the environment. Businesses should be responsible for every stage of a product's life. And in the last video, I mentioned cradle to the grave legislation. That's what this is. It's laws in place, not principles, but laws that are put in place to govern how things move through a process so that we can be more environmentally safe. Not to say that there's not violations of the stuff here that we're reading about, because there's violations of it all the time. But companies need to be aware of what the punishments are for these types of violations and how seriously unethical they are. So cradle to the grave legislation helps with that. The businesses have to be responsible for every stage of a product's life, from the minute they make it to the minute it's no longer sort of it's no longer. We would say that's in terms of production. We need to decrease emissions when it comes to our vehicles that we drive. We have to be careful about the amount of unclean air that we breathe. And for those of you that are familiar with the Volkswagen case, that the environmental Volkswagen case about that what Volkswagen did in keeping those cars on the road and knowing that they were causing mass pollution, that becomes an ethical sort of issue in itself. So all of that connects with this content that you're reading about. In addition, packaging, transportation, disposal, these are all parts of a process that need to to occur and occur on a sort of regulated level, so that we have safe products out there in our environment to use. Okay, so the last part here before we talk about advertising is what we call insider trading. And I think most of you, if you're studying business, have probably heard of what insider trading is, and you're already aware of this kind of unethical practice out there. And the authors feel it necessary to draw this in as well. What does insider trading involve? I've put it on that slide. It involves using privileged inside information not available to the general public to make a profit by buying or selling company stock. So using information that otherwise causes a unequal sort of fairness across the board. If you use secret information to help you benefit that other people don't have the same access to, we see how that's unethical, which was my point from before. So why? We say, well, it violates company trust by using company resources for personal gain. Why else? It harms public stock holders in buying or selling stock, which is about to increase or decrease in value. Here I'm thinking about a person that pulls all their stocks out, in advance of them taking a massive drop. If they have access to information that someone else doesn't, then that practice would be unethical. And we see, that is clearly obvious with those kinds of examples. It also undermines public confidence in the financial marketplace. If there is people that are, again, we would say cheating in the marketplace, then and they have this access to information that we don't have, then it's an unfair practice, and it's clearly unethical at the same time. So the last part of the chapter here, we're going to talk about ethical issues in marketing. And I know that a lot of students studying business ethics are also at least taking classes on marketing, and some of you sort of majoring and going in that route or down that route in your career plans. And so when we talk about marketing, at least from an ethical point of view, we're drawing in on the following that I put on your slide there. What are the issues in marketing? Well, let's be clear. The issues are pricing, issues around pricing, issues around advertising, and issues around target marketing, target marketing a particular segment of the population, and why that's unethical and how it becomes unethical. So when we talk about ethical marketing, and you're going to be reading an article this week as part of your activities, ethical marketing means we do things in certain ways that are in agreement with what most of us would expect on the other end or as consumers. So, and we also want to be ethical in the way that we do that. So what is ethical marketing? It means not coercing. So we say, what's coercion? High pressure sales, or appealing to a customer's vulnerabilities, or taking advantage of somebody's perhaps inability to make a decision on something, or manipulating that customer, right? So there's something about that is clearly dishonest and sort of unethical. So we're going to try to cultivate habits to work against coercing, right? Deceiving, which is misleading people. And I've given you an example actually in this week of a misleading, deceptive ad that you're going to be seeing in your reflection. And of course, manipulating consumers or customers. So when it comes to pricing, on the next slide, the title pricing, it really centers around the principle that I've listed here, that we're setting a fair market value on a service or a product. And we're basing that on a fair and reasonable consideration, such as, if I'm making a product, how much the product is costing me to make. right? If it's costing me $2 to make a product and I'm selling it for $100, how can I justify the difference in that? So here, that's where this sort of makes a connection with your content. Um, what kinds of materials am I using? What are the productions costs, the packaging, everything? So again, from the other side, cradle to the grave, everything that I have to put into this product and my workload and so forth. I want to be able to make a reasonable product, but I want to make a reasonable profit as well. And so, how can I make a reasonable profit then, but also act ethically and keep that in mind? And that's really where we say, okay, if you're going into marketing, if you're pursuing a career in marketing, these are things you should be thinking about as ethical issues in your daily work as advertisers. How we set prices for things, what's fair price. On the next slide, unethical pricing practices. Here's some that we can be thinking and talking about. What does it mean to price gouge, right? To increase the price when a product is essential and limited. When you know a product is, that people need that product, for example. I'll use gasoline as an example. When you gouge people, and of course we have laws in place to prevent this, but it does sometimes occur where we see in the marketplace the company increasing a price for whatever reason, and they know that they can raise the price and that they're going to make money, but they're doing it by gouging it. Or we would say gouging, the practice of gouging. What does it mean to price fix? You see that on the next sort of definition there. When companies conspire together to set a high price. A couple of different gasoline companies get together and they set the price for the purchase of gasoline. They fix the price that is a lot higher, let's say, than it should be. Predatory pricing. One company lowers its price below cost, of course, the motive would be to drive competitors out of business. If you're selling a product that would normally be sold for $50, you're selling that same product for $8, and everyone else is charging $50, right? You're driving down the price of the product. So when we think about a company, one company lowers the price just to get customers in the door, and by lowering the price that substantially, another competitor is at risk for no longer being in business. But I suppose that's the nature of business. It doesn't mean that it is the right sort of course of action as ethical practitioners out there in the workplace. On the next slide, you see a cigarette ad where, if you look back in the 1950s, for example, you would have seen ads like this, and I included it on your slide just for you to sort of take a look at. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. So we see at one time, advertisements were radically different than they are now. There's, of course, something unethical, clearly unethical today. When it comes to a doctor, you would never see this, a medical doctor on TV promoting smoking cigarettes and the habit of nicotine and the fact that it is not good for you. So, but you did see these kinds of ads in the 1950s. So the question is then, well, did the doctors in the 1950s, did they really think that smoking was good for you? And why did they endorse smoking? And of course, there's different motives that people have. Sometimes they're paid, right? Doctors are paid or were paid, right? So there's a whole sort of wider issue around this topic when it comes to marketing. It's really a really fascinating area that I really sort of love to look at. I want to, and you'll see this in your activity for the week, I want to be able to get you to look at the way people advertise and what is sort of unethical about the way that they advertise, or where are the fine lines that they've crossed, and what is that all about? And you're doing that actually in your activity for this week. So it is also useful on the next slide for us to look at what the purposes of advertising are. And I've listed them for you right there. To inform customers, to present a positive image or brand, to persuade potential customers or consumers to purchase or support a product, service, or cause. That's what advertising is. That's the purpose of it, or the essence of advertising. So what also happens in advertising are these other sort of issues, but we always look back at that as sort of, okay, what are we trying to do? What's the ethical route here? The ethical route is to see these purposes as having value and following through on them. So we see legal issues in advertising, and I've included also what kinds of legal issues we see, and they also discuss this in your text as well. What do those legal issues look like? Deceptive or misleading advertising, right? There's legal issues, implications of that today. We still have this today. Hidden or absent disclaimers. You're not telling your consumer about your product entirely, and so the assumption is they're not able to make a decision that is a good decision if you're not giving them all the information that they need. False and unfair comparisons. Misappropriation of someone's personality, using a celebrity to advertise a product, let's say, and understanding that that person could be paid for their service, right? Compensated for that particular service. And here, there's legal issues around that connect with our study of ethics. Contests which rely on chance to require a purchase of a product, or require the word. So we think, okay, about contests that we might have entered in, our past, our own experience, where you might be misled in terms of how many winners that there is from a particular contest you've entered. If you pay $1 to enter a contest that has 10 million people as part of it, right? How is the company selling that to you? Are they making it look like you have a really high chance of winning when in fact you don't have anywhere near that, right? So those are, again, issues for us to consider. When it comes to the social issues in advertising, on your next slide, you're going to see what it's all about. And in our next video, we're going to come back and sort of draw this out as we go through and finish the rest of this chapter. I'll see you then.